The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. An Odyssey to Jerusalem. By Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Bryan Godwin. Part 16. The Shroud of Galilee. The next morning we met Salah on the terrace, where he was already sitting at the breakfast table. His son had called us. Our Palestinian host and colleague presented us with a letter that had been placed on his front door during the night. It was written in Arabic, which is why I am, of course, writing down a translation according to Salah's report. The letter stated the following: To the traitor Salah, which side are you on? The people of Palestine rise up, but you stab them in their backs. The people fight for their self-determination, but you work for the foreign oppressors. When the Ottomans are expelled from Jerusalem, you have to decide, which side are you on with your family? Choose wisely, choose life, or you will suffer death at the hand of your false masters. The short message was a clear threat. Salah was now clearly accused of being in the payroll of the Ottoman occupiers. Should he not cease this activity, he would become the legitimate target of the resistance. I don't like being threatened, said Salah, who had regained his resolve, and I certainly won't be intimidated. The fact that they even mention my family I take personally. With this message, these people are really barking up the wrong tree. But the threatening letter also has a good facet, because I know exactly where I stand again on the side of law and order. I am a servant of the state whose laws apply to all. I briefly thought of the letter to the Romans of the Apostle Paul, where he demanded from the early Christian community, among other things, secular submission to Roman rule. As is well known, the story did not end well. While Paul relied on the protection of the state, his life ended under the hatch of a Roman executioner during Emperor Nero's persecution of the Christians. I wasn't sure whether Salah would take the fall for the wrong cause and eventually become a martyr. However, when I expressed my concerns in this regard, he quickly brushed it off. Thank you, Dr. Watson, he said, for caring about my well-being. But there is more at stake here than my personal fate. It's time to step up our investigative efforts. Holmes immediately agreed. There should be no more deaths. Something has to be done. I frowned and replied, We are currently lacking starting points, I'm afraid. Speak for yourself, Watson, Holmes replied. I was giving some thought to yesterday's incident at the Wailing Wall. They took a large canvas for the banner, and we are miles away from the sea. In Jerusalem, you can't buy something like this without causing a stir. The origin of the cloth may lead us to the perpetrators. How are you going to find the origin of a piece of cloth? I asked skeptically. I already have a certain idea, Holmes replied. Do tell, Salah, where did you think the banner was taken? Our Palestinian colleague thought for a moment, then said, It will have been confiscated by the army. Certainly it is stored outside the city at one of the garrisons. I will investigate. Salah learned within half an hour that the cloth had actually been taken to a military base northwest of the new gate. When we arrived there and told the two soldiers watching at the entrance that we wanted to investigate the canvas, they initially thought it was a joke. But Salah convinced them of the seriousness of our request, whereupon one of the soldiers immediately ran off while the other declared, You arrived just in time. The shameful object is being burned at the parade grounds. Burned? Holmes repeated irritatedly. This is extremely important evidence. You can't destroy evidence. We only carry out our orders, the soldier justified himself. I noticed that smoke was rising above the camp. Obviously, the order of destruction was already underway. When I pointed this out to my colleagues, who could no longer be stopped, they pushed past the Ottoman soldier and quickly ran into the camp. We arrived in a large courtyard where the cloth, cut into smaller parts, was actually already in flames. About 10 Ottoman soldiers stood around the fire and rejoiced that this insult to their sultan had now been eliminated. We need a piece of the cloth, shouted Holmes. Salah nodded and approached the fire, which blazed a few feet in the air and radiated such unbearable heat that the soldiers retreated and watched our colleague's actions suspiciously. He slowly went to the edge of the sea of flames and looked for a tip of the cloth that had not touched the flames. When he discovered a piece, he pulled it out with a lightning-fast movement. It was already burning on the end, and Salah quickly threw it into a horse trough and then cooled his own hands in the water. Holmes and I joined. I immediately saw that Salah had suffered an unpleasant burn on at least one arm. I sincerely hope, he said with a smile, that it was worth it. We'll see, Holmes replied, pulling the no longer burning but now soaked piece of cloth out of the trough to inspect it. I couldn't see anything special and nothing unusual in it, but my friend explained after just a few seconds. As I had thought, come, Watson, feel the cloth. Following the prompt, I touched the material, but had to state, apart from the burned ends, a normal cloth. What about it? It's amazingly thin for a canvas, Holmes replied. Shipping at sea requires thicker fabrics. The sails of an ocean ship must be resistant and extremely tear-resistant. They must withstand storms. As a result, normal canvas is of course also quite heavy, and I already thought at the western wall that it would hardly have been possible for the perpetrators to bring it there and hang it. It had to be something more special, and this cloth here is actually thinner and also lighter than you would expect. It would be unsuitable for the sails of a ship sailing in the Mediterranean. It comes from a production for inland navigation, probably for fishing boats. Holmes was right. Now I also noticed that the fabric I held between my fingers was not a normal canvas, so I asked the logical question, where are sailboats in Palestine? Salah took his now cooled arms out of the potion and said, It's very simple, gentlemen. We are looking for an inland body of water that is too large for the sole use of rowing boats, where sailing boats with light sails can be used. And where is that? I added. Before Salah could answer, Holmes did it for him. Well, the Sea of Galilee, of course. We must go to Galilee. As I rolled my eyes, Holmes added, Don't complain, Watson. You wanted to see more of the Holy Land. It seems that you are getting a good picture now. Capernaum is said to have been an early place of work of Jesus of Nazareth. There he recruited the fisher of men, Simon Peter, and walked across the water. Rejoice! My joy at another overland trip was limited, but it was inevitable. Salah commandeered a horse-drawn carriage at the military base for what he said to the soldiers was an urgent police operation of political importance. With this vehicle, we immediately made our way north, finally turning onto the route of the former Roman road Via Maris, which would take us directly to Tiberias, the largest city on the Sea of Galilee. It took half the day until we finally arrived in the northern Jordan Valley. Tiberias was located on the southern shore of the lake, which was crossed by the Jordan River. We headed for the port, where the fishing boats had already returned from their trips. Some of them were actually equipped with sails similar to our piece of evidence. While Salah and I watched the fishermen bringing their catch ashore and unwrapping their nets, Holmes was already looking for something else. There won't be many cloth merchants offering sails here, Holmes suspected. If we find the right man, then he will be able to tell us which person from Jerusalem bought a relevant quantity recently. I understand, Salah replied, and went to one of the fishing boats to talk to its owner. After just a minute, he returned and announced, We're lucky. There's only one dealer that we need to visit. His shop is very close. He walked ahead and we followed him into the city. On the second street behind the harbor, we arrived in front of the shop in question. It was inscribed with both Arabic and Hebrew characters. When we entered, we found a very old owner, who was recognizable as a Jewish merchant by his clothes and hairstyle. He greeted us kindly and asked us about our wishes. Since he had identified Holmes and me as foreigners, he tried to speak more moderate English. We're not here for business, Salah explained. We work for the Ottoman administration and are investigating a criminal case. The trader's face went wide in surprise. A criminal case, he repeated. In Tiberias, there are certainly no crimes and no criminals. This is a peaceful place. We are looking for a man or several men from Jerusalem, Holmes clarified. Are they part of your clientele? No, the merchant claimed. I have nothing to offer that cannot be bought in Jerusalem. It's about the kind of canvas used here on the fishing boats, Holmes continued. We were told that this can only be purchased in your assortment. Well, that's probably true, the trader confirmed. But who would want to equip a sailboat in Jerusalem? That's exactly our question, I interjected. You haven't accidentally sold some sailcloths to strangers lately? The old Jew thought for a moment, then he answered, Maybe. There were 2 Germans here recently. Holmes perked up. Germans? He asked. You sold canvas to men from Germany. Certainly, certainly, murmured the merchant, to think again briefly. But they were not real Germans, but apparently Jews from Germany. Ashkenazim. They spoke Yiddish to each other. I assume they belonged to the Jewish settlement on the northern shore of the lake, which was founded by immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe. I know this settlement, Salah said. These are decent, capable, and harmless people. It is hard to imagine that they have anything to do with the unrest in Jerusalem. We're going to have to check this out, Holmes noted. Either some of these good settlers are actually fishermen, or the peaceful facade is deceptive. After thanking the Jewish merchant and saying goodbye, we returned to our borrowed horse-drawn carriage. The trip continued along the lake shore to the north, where, a little outside of Capernaum, the settlement in question was located. Although we were even further away from Jerusalem, we finally had a hot trace to investigate.